So I'm a little bit of a devil's advocate kind of a person. I just sort of like to be able to see the other side of things. I'm maybe a little bit cynical, maybe a little bit more cynical than I might need to be. I like to make certain that things are true. You ever get those? I'm the guy that when you send me the emails about all that stuff going on in the world, I go over and I check the other websites to see if it's a hoax. Are you that person? Because I send them back to you right away. If you've sent me those things and it was a hoax, I send them right back to you. I'm like, look, you should check out Snopes because this is a con of some sort. You know, I like to know that things are true. I want to know whether they're false, true. I like it, and I also like to be able to see the subtlety or even the nuance. Anybody here like this, where you sort of question things? Your first instinct is to sort of question them. Yeah, I'm not really so sure. We'll see. Prove it to me. Show me. This is my tendency. It's sort of just my bent, which is why I am particularly excited about this series. Because we get to take some of this common sense stuff that's out there, and we get to say, really? You sure? How much of it's true? How much of it's false? How much do we live by that we haven't even examined? You know, that unexamined life sort of a thing. So I'm excited about it. I like this one in particular that we're going to be starting with today. When one door closes, another one opens. Because, of course, many of you have said that to me. I have said it to many of you. I have said to you, oh, I understand this is some tough times. But you know what? When one door closes, another one opens. Don't you know that to be true? When one door closes, another one's going to open. You don't have to worry about what's happening to you right now at this very moment, because when one door closes, another one will most certainly open. Now, I would say, if you were to ask me, what do I really like about it? What do you really like about that saying? I would have to say it captures a certain optimism. I love that. I like that way of living. I'm also a bit more of an optimist than a pessimist. I like to look at the opportunities that life presents. And I know that many of you do as well. You've gotten to where you are today. You have overcome challenges. You've seen massive sacrifices, suffering, overcome and beaten because you're optimistic. And I love how this saying captures that idea, this optimism. And I also think that from kind of a spiritual perspective, it has a sort of piety to it. There's this sort of this faithful patience in it, right? If you were to sort of try to baptize this thing and make it a little bit more Christian, you might hear it as, well, you sort of have to wait on God for these things. You know, you have to trust Him. Because that's what this, you know, when one door closes, another one's going to open. Just wait on God. That's what I sort of like about it. And that's why I think we often use it, why we tell each other, why we encourage each other in it, however, there's a potential downside to it. Yes, it's optimistic, it seems, but what if it's also a bit defeatist? Is that possible? Is it possible that that's more the feel, the vibe of our culture today? What I mean by that is, what if it isn't about a patient faithfulness? What if instead we end up living more like sort of weak need, maybe a weak need passivity, where we just sort of let life come, let it sort of happen. We just sort of wait. This is part of the saying that I'm uncomfortable with. Maybe you can think of it like this. All right, how many of you guys all know we live in just one of the best areas in the world, right? You guys know this. You know that there's more great stuff here in New York within driving distance of where you are right now than anywhere else in the world, right? You all know this. Okay. All of you who have been to the Empire State Building, would you stand up? Everybody who has been to the top of the Empire State Building, stand up. That's right. Just in case you think walking by it is... I've seen it from the tunnel's entrance. Now, all right, so you've all been to the Empire State Building. Great. Now, those of you who have been to the Empire State Building in the last, say, 5 years remain standing. Everybody else who has not been to the top in the last 5 years, all right. Any of you who have only been to the top of the Empire State Building with out-of-town guests, sit down. I mean, you actually have gone up there by yourself, with your family, something like that. All right, a few more have sat down. Right now, those of you who are still standing, when's the last time you've been to the Empire State Building? 3 years ago? Just 2 years ago? Last year? You went up to the top, you looked off, right? It's amazing, right? Dawn, when's last?
3 years.
3 years, right? All right, go ahead and sit down. Now, what if we repeated this with everything else? What are some of the great sights to be seen in New York? Statue of Liberty. Oh, my goodness. That's amazing. When's the last time we went actually there, to the Liberty Island, to actually be a part of that experience? What else?
Carmine.
Yes, I mean, come on now, Carmine's. What about, you know, we went recently to the New York Botanical Gardens. World renowned. One of the greatest botanical gardens in all of the world. Perhaps the greatest botanical garden in all the world. Species there that don't exist anywhere else now. You know, preserved, protected. The Bronx Zoo. These sort of amazing things, right? What about things maybe like a Broadway show? Not quite so, you know, unbelievably crazy, but we all talk about going, and how often do we? Many times, we were talking about this recently, as how many times, we're thinking about doing a little Broadway show thing, by the way. Just kind of watch for it. What happens if when we ask you guys about it, why you haven't gone, what do you say? See, now, if you think about your situation, oftentimes, we haven't participated in these things. We haven't gone and sat and walked over the Brooklyn Bridge. We haven't actually taken an opportunity to do things that are easily within our grasp, maybe not the Broadway show, but easily within our grasp, because we simply haven't. No other reason. No other reason. You say, well, it's the time. Really? Because you do lots of other stuff with your time. See, this is what I'm talking about. There's a certain passivity that we live within. We just sort of exist. We don't take action. Now, if you start to translate this into what we're talking about, when one door closes, another opens, I think this can sort of betray a type of certainty that we all appreciate, that we want. We want to know that everything is going to work out just fine. We want to know that all of the details are going to be woven together in such a way that we don't have to worry. We're going to have what we want. We're going to have everything we need. We're going to be taken care of in all the ways that we need to be taken care of. We're going to live our lives in a certain way. We want certainty. And yet I'm not really sure certainty is the call of the Christian life. In fact, I'm quite confident it isn't. If you put another Christian spin on it, you know, Christians put their own spin. If you put a Christian spin on this, it might be something like, I wonder what God's will is for my life. We often want to know this. What's God's will for my life? I want to know God's will for my life. If I knew His will, then it wouldn't be a very big deal for me to obey it, as long as I knew it. And what kind of certainty do you need? You want all the details laid out. You want to know which path to take. Left, right, what school, what person, what job, what house, what neighborhood. You want all the details laid out for you. Yet I'm not really sure this is the biblical story. Have you ever found yourself waiting for that big opportunity that never comes? Have you been looking out saying, oh my goodness, what's happening in my life? Come on, where's the door? This opportunity closed down, it's shut down. Where's the door? Have you ever found yourself waiting for that next opportunity, but it never comes? Then what? Just keep waiting? Because you know that waiting is God's will for your life? How do you know that? He told you that? Waiting is the thing He told you to do? Very often, this is how we end up living our lives. If you have ever had a missed opportunity you did not seize because you were simply waiting, then you get a little sense as to what I'm talking about here. This is why I say it can be a little bit defeatist. It can lead to a sort of weak-kneed passivity in your spiritual life, and even in your overall life? What if instead, when one door closed, you weren't supposed to wait for another door to open? What if that wasn't the way we were called to live? What if when one door closed, we were supposed to crash through a window? What if we were supposed to try all of the other doors? What if we were supposed to kick them in? What if you were supposed to, as one of my favorite authors, Erwin McManus, says, what if you were supposed to run forehead first through the wall? May not be safe, but how do you know that's not what you're supposed to do? I think very often, open up if you would to 1 Samuel chapter 13. I think very often we try to live our lives in such a way that we will minimize all risk. We will downplay the opportunities that are out there because they weren't clear enough to be seized. Much of this message today comes from my favorite passage and author, Erwin McManus, in a book called Seizing Your Divine Moments. I recommend it to all you guys. I always have for quite a few years, ever since this book first impacted my life. I think there is a fundamental flaw in this idea that when one door closes, another one opens. And I think that the flaw is that circumstances lie. Have you ever seen this? That circumstances will lie? There's a story about this guy, little kid, Bobby. Bobby was one of these kids that, the other kids, the older kids in the town used to make fun of. They used to tease him and say, maybe he wasn't playing with a full deck. And one of the reasons that they would do this is because constantly, to prove their point about, our little boy Bobby, they would offer him a nickel or a dime. They would say to him, hey, Bobby, do you want a nickel or a dime? You can go ahead and take one of them. Whichever one you want, you can take. You want the nickel or the dime? Inevitably, Bobby would pick the nickel. Of course, the older boy said it's because it's bigger. See, he thinks because it's bigger, it's better and more valuable. So he would bypass the dime. Well, this older group of kids would, of course, continue to do this each and every day, just mocking this poor kid, laughing at him behind his back, making fun of him. And one of the days they did this, they were in a little shop, and they did the whole thing. And he, of course, Bobby chose the nickel again. And off the older kids run for, more of their malfeasance, whatever, off to do more harm in this world. And the store owner gets a little sympathy in his heart, and he says, Bobby, don't you know what's going on? Don't you know these kids are mocking you? Don't you know why are you picking the nickel? Just take the dime. Why are you picking the nickel? It's just bigger doesn't mean it's more valuable. And Bobby says, yeah, but if I take the dime, they won't keep offering it to me. And I've made $20 so far. It's like the circumstances lie. Just because what you see, what you think you see around you. This is the case that we find in this passage. We're in 1 Samuel 13, one of my all-time favorite stories in the Bible, starting in verse 5. The Philistines assembled to fight Israel with 3,000 chariots, 6,000 charioteers, and soldiers as numerous as the sand on the seashore. They went up and camped at Michmash, east of Beth-aven. When the men of Israel saw that their situation was critical and their army was hard-pressed, they hid in caves and thickets among the rocks and in pits and cisterns. Some Hebrews even crossed the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. Sort of get the picture here, right? This massive army with superior weaponry is amassing to destroy Israel and her army. That's one of the circumstances that King Saul was faced with. Saul remained, if you look up at the next verse there, Saul remained at Gilgal, and all the troops with him were quaking with fear, which of course makes perfect sense when you look at those circumstances. Quaking with fear. Verse 8, he waited 7 days, the time set by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and Saul's men began to scatter. So he said, bring me the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings. And Saul offered up the burnt offering. Just as he finished making the offering, Samuel arrived, and Saul went out to greet him. Saul was told to wait for Samuel. He couldn't wait. Samuel didn't show up at the right time. Saul takes matters into his own hands. Samuel says to him, major mistake, Saul. How dare you offer up what the priests ought to have offered up? What are you taking this into your own hands for? You're not asking for God's direction or plan. You've already decided. You're doing things you ought not to. You should be waiting on God in this circumstance. Now, waiting on God, of course, is part of why we like this saying, because we're supposed to wait on God. And yet, Saul wasn't simply waiting on God or making plans for the battle that was supposed to be coming. He was trying to do everything he can to manipulate his men. He wasn't obeying what the command was clearly given to him. Now, of course, we'll see later that now that he's acted so foolishly, terrible things and ramifications for Saul and for his family. Look down even further in verse 15. Then Samuel left Gilgal and went up to Gibeah in Benjamin, and Saul counted the men who were with him. They numbered about 600. Because of this whole fiasco, Saul's troops are down to 600 against heavily armed, far superior fighting force. These are the circumstances that Saul was faced with. This is why his men and Saul were quivering, shaking with fear. Look at verse 16. Saul and his son Jonathan and the men with them were staying in Gibeah in Benjamin while the Philistines camped at Michmash. Raiding parties went out from the Philistine camp in 3 detachments. One turned toward Ophrah, which is very funny, in the vicinity of Shual, another toward Beth Horon, and the third toward the borderland overlooking the valley of Zeboim, facing the desert. These names obviously don't mean too much to us, but think of it like this. We're here, and in Hicksville is a superior fighting force bent on destroying us. And recently our spies have told us that now they're sending some out toward the Levittown area, and another detachment has gone up through Port Washington, and they've already got another detachment over in Little Neck. They're encircling us. They're closing in. These raiding parties are already doing damage, and our fighting forces are simply too small to fight against them. We're heavily outnumbered, heavily outmanned. Now it gets even worse. Verse 19. Not a blacksmith could be found in the whole land of Israel because the Philistines had said, otherwise the Hebrews will make swords or spears. So all Israel went down to the Philistines to have their plowshares, mattocks, axes, and sickles sharpened. The price was 2/3 of a shekel, in case you were wondering, for sharpening plowshares and mattocks, and 1/3 of a shekel for sharpening forks and axes, and for the repointing of goads. The point that the author is making is they had no access to the metallurgy. They were dependent on the occupying force for even their basic farming equipment. Never mind their weaponry. There was no weaponry. He goes on to say, the day of battle, verse 22, not a soldier with Saul and Jonathan had a sword or spear in his hand. Only Saul and his son Jonathan had them. 2. The whole army, all 600 men, were already down, and the rest, what are you carrying? Clubs? Sticks? Bats? Against chariots and swords and spears? I mean, this is shaping up to be a slaughter of epic proportion. 2 guys with real weapons. 2. That's it. Now a detachment of the Philistines, as verse 23, had gone out to the pass at Michmash. Now things are just getting terrible. These are the circumstances that they were faced with. I think for many of us, we start to experience circumstances and we begin to say, look, doors closing left and right. All closing. We can't go this way, can't do this, can't have that, can't win this. Doors closing all around us. They go through all this detail to make certain we know there are no other doors. There are no windows. There is no way out. They're hemmed in, and they're facing a catastrophic slaughter. The king, his son, and the only 600 brave men who are willing to fight are soon to be slaughtered. This is the despair that could begin to settle in. You know, you might have a marriage that is on the rocks. You're struggling. You have been for many years. You look at the circumstances. The circumstances tell you there's no hope left. New York judge recently ordered that in one fighting couple, maybe you heard this, that they now have to build a wall in their house. Did you hear about this? The couple's been fighting for so many years, they can't figure out what to do. The judge ordered that they build a wall between their parts of the house. Can you imagine that? The real wall that has been between, the wall between them relationally now has to be built up to a real wall. I love judges that do stuff like this. I think it's so funny. Scientific America said in a recent study that no matter what the details of your arguments are, it always comes down to two things. No matter what you are fighting about, think about the last 2 or 3 fights that you've had with your significant other. Think about what they are. No matter what the details are, this study said, it always comes down to one person who has felt like they have been unfairly taken advantage of or neglected. It doesn't matter the details of your fight. See, the circumstances, you think it's related to how you're raising the kids, how you're spending the money, how come you're not able to do the things that you want to do, how come they're not treating. But it all comes down to the simple kinds of truths that we already know about how we relate together. I feel like I'm being taken advantage of. I feel like I'm being neglected. Doesn't matter what the circumstances are. The circumstances lie. Maybe you've got a heart that says, you know what, I want to serve the poor in the world. I want to do what Christ has called me to do. I want to live my life in such a way that it matters for others. I want to share my faith. We talked about last week about how it is we can understand what the Christian message is and how to share your faith. I want to do that. Because you've got that stir, you've got that thing in your heart that says, I want my life to matter for something bigger than the pettiness that I find myself in every day. I want to do something. I want to make a difference. And then you look at your circumstances. And you say, I'm too busy. So what do? Well, you wait. I don't have the resources I need. I can't do anything yet until I save up some money, until I get my plan in place. I can't. So what do? You wait. You're waiting for that door to open. God's put something in your heart. He's called you to a different kind of a life. And what do? We wait. I don't know enough. I don't have the training I need. I don't have the skills I need. Does that mean you're going after those things? Usually not. Usually it means we wait. We sit it out. We continue to wait. When you look at our story here, it's really exactly what took place. Look at chapter 14, verse 1. One day, Jonathan, son of Saul, said to his young armor-bearer, "Come, let's go over to the Philistine outpost on the other side." But he did not tell his father. Jonathan was Saul's son, obviously. Saul was staying on the outskirts of Gibeah, under a pomegranate tree in Migron. With him were about 600 men, among whom was Ahijah, who was wearing an ephod. And obviously he is the priest. He was a son of Ichabod's brother Ahitub, son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the Lord's priest, in Shiloh. No one was aware that Jonathan had left. So what does Saul have there? Saul has everything he needs to act. He's got the religious backing. He's got the military backing. He has the divine right given by God as king of Israel to fight against the Philistines. He's been given the command to drive out the Philistines, the invading force. And what is he doing? Hanging out under the pomegranate tree, kicking back, waiting for what? A door to open? What's he waiting for? Get at it. Let's go. He has everything in his power to act, yet won't. Even the mention of the pomegranate tree, we talked about this in the past, this whole affluence thing and the blessings of God is symbolized by that. How often it's the blessings of God that cause us to not act anymore, that tie us up. God starts blessing you in certain ways. You have new things. You have a certain lifestyle. And all of those things are the things that begin to trip us up. We have all that we need to act, and we simply don't. Often because of the comfort that God has blessed us with. What an irony! What an irony! I think when we begin to see this, we can start to see a little bit of ourselves in it. And yet when we go to the story of Jonathan, we start to see the other side. Saul and Jonathan are contrasted in this story because Jonathan realizes that we can live in a sold-out, crazy sort of obedience to God. That we can live in such a way that we're not wringing our hands waiting for some mythical door to open, waiting to understand what God's will is for our lives before we do anything. Jonathan, he begins to realize this, and you can see this in our next verses. On each side, this is verse 4. On each side of the pass that Jonathan intended to cross to reach the Philistine outpost was a cliff. One was called Bozez, and the other Seneh. One cliff stood to the north toward Michmash, the other to the south toward Geba. So you get the idea. He's got these cliffs on either side. He's going to go up to this outpost. Jonathan said to his young armor-bearer, "Come, let's go over to this outpost of those uncircumcised fellows. Perhaps the Lord will act in our behalf." If you're a writer in your Bible, go ahead and circle that. Perhaps. We'll come back to that. Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few. Do all that you have in mind, his armor-bearer said. "Go ahead, I'm with you, heart and soul." Jonathan said, "Come then. We will cross over toward the men and let them see us. And if they say to us, 'Wait there until we come to you,' we will stay where we are and not go up to them. But if they say, 'Come up to us,' we will climb up, because that will be our sign that the Lord has given them into our hands." So both of them showed themselves to the Philistine outpost. Look, said the Philistines, "the Hebrews are crawling out of the holes they were hiding in." The men of the outpost shouted to Jonathan and his armor-bearer, "Come up to us and we'll teach you a lesson." So Jonathan said to his armor-bearer, "Climb up after me. The Lord has given them into the hand of Israel." Jonathan climbed up, using his hands and feet, with his armor-bearer right behind him. The Philistines fell before Jonathan and his armor-bearer, followed and killed behind him. In that first attack, Jonathan and his armor-bearer killed some 20 men in an area about half an acre. Then panic struck the whole army, those in the camp and field, and those in the outposts and raiding parties, and the ground shook. It was a panic sent by God. You can see this scene, right? The cliffs, Jonathan setting up some random criteria. If they say this to us, then it's this. If they say this to us, it's this. And how does he know any of that? We have no indication that he's been told any of this. He's just sick and tired of waiting. And it all comes down to that idea of perhaps. We want certainty. Jonathan says, maybe if we go pick a fight, God will come through. You imagine being the armor bearer? I love this story, because the poor armor bearer is like, so let me get this straight. We're going to go up to the Philistines' outpost. We have one sword. You're going to be climbing up hands and feet, not with a sword in your hand. You're going to wait for them on the cliff with superior positioning above you while you crawl over the edge with the only sword the two of us have. And when we get up there, that'll be God's sign that we're gonna, and you know this, perhaps? Tell me you saw an angel before we decide to go do this. I mean, we want certainty. I mean, I love the armor bearer. I wish we don't know anything about this guy. That he's like, hey man, I'm in. Let's just do this thing. Like, really? You're in? Because it seems moronic. It doesn't make any sense at all. Yeah, man, let's do it. Let's go. Perhaps. That's what we have to live by. Perhaps God will come through for us. If we get ourselves in over our heads, maybe God will help out. It doesn't matter. God can save by many, by few. It doesn't actually matter. God can do this. Let's go. No indication at all that he knew that this was God's plan. He's kicking in his own door. He's opening his own window. He's busting through the wall. When this is one of these verses that has really just changed the way I understand God and who he's called me to be and how he's called us to live. Even as a church, this has changed the way I understand God to act on our behalf. Rather than sitting under the pomegranate tree. You know what happened later? I can't get into this now, but later on, Saul, he has certainty about all these things, right? He knows what God's will is. He becomes arrogant. He starts making stupid vows. He almost risks the life he does. He puts Jonathan's life on the line. The men have to come and save Jonathan from his father because of Saul's stupidity. Why? Because Saul had certainty. Certainty can create arrogance. It can create complacency. Uncertainty, perhaps, can create faith, trust, dependence, and an environment where God can come through in spectacular ways. We know that Jonathan decides to go pick a fight, and you might call this a go until no attitude. Go until no. We like to wait. We want to know what God's will is for our lives. Jonathan says, let's go until no. Let's get it done. Let's keep going until we know it's not God's will. Totally different way of understanding this world. Now, for Jonathan, he's saying, we ask, what's God's will for my life? Jonathan's saying, how do I spend my life to fulfill God's will? A different way. You want to know what God's will is for your life. You guys heard of these billboards, right, that are out there? They were popular about 5-10 years ago now. I always loved them. They put up these billboards across the country signed by God. They're supposed to be messages from God. Imagine if your whole life was this way. That God, you'd be driving down the road and God would answer your prayers, tell you what your will is, His will is for your life by putting it on a billboard. Some of these I love. One says, let's meet at my house Sunday before the game. God. Signed God, right? Another one says, come on over and bring the kids. What part of thou shalt not didn't you understand? Imagine driving down the road, you're stuck in traffic, and all of a sudden you start to see these. One says, love the wedding, invite me to the marriage. Ooh, that's hard. Another one, that love thy neighbor thing. I meant it. God. I like, there's a couple of my favorites. Do you have any idea where you're going? If you use my name in vain, I'll make your rush hour longer. One says, you think it's hot here? Tell the kids I love them. Isn't that a great message from God, right? Another one is, don't make me come down there. I like that. You're driving down the road, you don't make me come down there. God. Wouldn't it be great to know? Listen, I know God's will for your life. I do. I already know it. You don't need to be wondering. You don't need to be waiting for that door to open. I already know what God's will is for your life. You're supposed to love Him with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength. You're supposed to love your neighbor as yourself. You're supposed to seek and save the lost. You're supposed to go out into all the world, make disciples, teaching people about the love of God, the sacrifice of Jesus on their behalf. That's God's will for your life. You don't need to go wondering about it, wondering whether you have His will. You do. You do know it. If you were to decide that you wanted to make a difference in this world, then you would have one thing in common with all of those who make a difference in this world. They take action. They do something, anything. They get in motion. They get in the game. They decide not to sit it out. And as a church, Beacon, I can assure you of this. You ask, should I share? Should I give? Yes. God wants you to be sharing your faith. He wants you to be giving to those in need. He wants you to be telling others about the love of Christ. He wants you to get involved in this game in a serious way. And as a church, He wants us to recognize our unique role here. We are the most important piece of real estate anywhere in the world. More influence flows out of New York than anywhere else. You were put here for such a time as this. It is a spiritually dark area. We are called to be a light in this place. This is an area considered by many to have a sort of a spiritual lethargy that has gotten not only into our communities, but even into our churches. You're called so that your church won't be that way, so that Beacon won't ever slip into this sort of malaise. You have been commissioned by God to make certain that we never live out that way, that we sit around waiting for something, that some mythical door that may or may not open. He is calling us to action. He's calling us to make our own way, trusting Him with perhaps to go until no. When we begin to live out this way, we will become a community of faith with increasing ways where we'll create an environment where people will come, will be welcomed, loved, encouraged, received where they are at, and given hope about where they can go. We'll become a place where we love each other recklessly, with a kind of abandon that will blow the mind of the world. We'll be the kind of place where we give in ways to those who are in need that others could never imagine possible. We will get out there so far on the limb that most would think we've lost our minds. And yet, when we do those things, the Bible tells us time and again, God comes through. It was a panic sent by God. It was power brought by God. It was a blessing poured out by His Spirit. That's who we want to be. Let's pray. Father, I'm asking that you would make us the kind of place who we're filled, Lord. Each and every one of us. We are filled with the power of the Spirit in such a way that we will live with boldness and courage. We will not sit idly by, will not sit comfortable, surrounded by all of the comfort of this world, while those in our communities drift further away from you, while our family, while our friends are facing a Christless eternity. I pray, Lord, that we would not be those who sit by with affluence and comfort while others are hungry. I ask, Lord, that we wouldn't use an excuse of waiting for you to reveal your will to us, but we would instead act with courage. Lord, you never told us to simply wait until a door opened. You've told us to overcome the obstacles of this world. I ask, Lord, that we would do that with increasing measure, challenging them, fighting against the status quo, becoming a force for good in this world, a source of hope as we expand your kingdom in our communities. We ask all these things in Christ's name. Amen.